Hi there, everyone. My name is Anastasia, and first of all, I'd just like to mention that I'm a resident of Huntington Beach. Now, I don't know if any of you guys know that little small town known as Surf City, but I live there and I travel through it a lot. Whether it be commuting to work, commuting to school, I love to drive, so I'm all over the place. And there was this one particular street that always kind of struck me as odd. Now, if you take a look at the upper left side of my presentation here, you'll see a road, you'll see a garbage truck, and then you'll see a bunch of trees and some weird tarp-looking fence. And I've always wondered, what's behind this fence? So, of course, ignoring the signs saying that there's video surveillance and everything else, I took a couple pictures because journalism is not illegal. So, going there myself, I recognized that there's a bunch of abandoned buildings. In fact, there's a couple pretty roughed up buildings that look very interesting to me in particular. So I did some digging, and here we are. Historic preservation for minority culture. So what exactly are these buildings that I'm talking about? So on the corner of Warner and Nichols Lane, there is a plot of land. It's about 5 acres, and it used to be known as the Wintersburg Presbyterian Church. Now, this church was purchased in 1908 by Reverend Fedortsova, and it was deeded to Charles Ferruta in 1912. This plot of land and this property was the very first house in Huntington Beach owned by a Japanese-American immigrant. This is a really big deal because back in the day, in the 1900s, Japanese immigrants were migrant laborers. They did not have houses. They lived in whatever their proprietor or their business owner kind of provided for them. This was a massive step towards the inclusion of Japanese Americans into both American society and Orange County society as a whole. So this was a community effort. It was purchased again thanks to the farm labor of both, Reverend Fedortsova and Charles Ferruta, who worked on these farms. And this was the first, again, Japanese family to have a real home, a home that was built just for them, that they owned, and land that they also owned. Up here on the right, that's what the barn and the bungalow used to look like. There's the church congregation right in front of it. And down here is Charles Ferruta and his wife in front of their barn. So this land was particularly set aside for a mission for this Japanese Wintersburg Presbyterian Church. And in 1909, California began to implement anti-Japanese bills. And these Japanese bills were meant to segregate Japanese immigrants both in schools, in society, in the workforce, all in hopes of kind of deterring them from assimilating and joining the American culture. Now, the Ferruta family was detained in 1942 after the Executive Order 9066. So when this order was in place, a lot of Japanese immigrants were sent to detention camps because they were deemed a threat after the events of Pearl Harbor. Now, obviously they were not a threat, but because they were detained, their homes were left alone, they were left unguarded, and a lot of Japanese immigrants returned to no homes at all. So the fact that when the family returned in 1945 from the Tuna Canyon Detention Center here in California, they were able to have their home back, the church back, the land back, that's a massive step. They were gone for a while, anything could have happened to that area, and it remained intact enough for them to return to their everyday lives and bring back that congregation. Now, I don't know how many of y'all go to church, but I go to church, and church could be a very important place for a lot of individuals who are seeking a sense of community. Whether you're religious or not, churches do provide a sense of community for different people, including this minority culture, which was Japanese Americans. Again, as immigrants who didn't have a place to go, the church, again, whether they were religious or not, helped them find that sense of unity within themselves. So once this church became, again, part of that Ferruta family, in 1957, Wintersburg and the surrounding area was annexed to what is now known as Huntington Beach. And Charles Ferruta actually never became a U.S. citizen. So despite the fact that he lived in Huntington Beach for over 50 years, over half of his life, he never became a U.S. citizen. Now, what I found really interesting about this is that he did take a citizenship at the Huntington Beach High School. I went to the Huntington Beach High School. So for me, the fact that this was so local and so close to me, I couldn't just sit back and say nothing about it. So again, looking at the images here, you can kind of see the congregation up there in 1930. Here's what the 1910 Manson mission looked like a couple years back, and I will explain why this is relevant in a second. And then here's a map of the overall structure. As you can see, there's a 1914 church, a 1913 home and bungalow. There's a man's mission, and again, 5-acre plot of land. This is massive. So during the time of World War II, the church, of course, was closed because the family was detained. It reopened in 1965. The church sits like this. And again, anyone can just go and take pictures of this, and so did I. And if you take a look at this, it looks pretty rough. And again, this is all covered behind a tarp. You're driving past this all the time on the street, and you see nothing of this except for trees, overgrowth, tarp, and maybe one building sticking out. It looks, to put it blankly, it looks awful. And the fact that there's so much rich, dense history behind this, and we're sitting by and letting nothing happen to it, is really bad. So in 1967, this 5-acre plot of land was sold, and it was purchased by Rainbow Disposal. Now, the current Japanese Wintersburg Presbyterian Church has moved their site to a different location in Santa Ana, but as of right now, this is what the original plot of land stands at. Public Services purchased Rainbow Disposal in 2014, and of course, there was no development on the land. Now, some might see this as a great thing, because hey, we're keeping all these historic buildings up, right? Yeah, like how? There's no protection against the elements, there's no protection against people coming in, graffitiing it, destroying it, and actually in 2022, if you look up there at the 1913 Peruta bungalow, it was damaged by fire. This resulted in the loss of that 1910 Manson mission that I showed you on the previous slides, which meant that these two buildings right over here were completely destroyed. Currently, there are 3 out of the 5 buildings standing, and again, these were the only pre-alien land law buildings that were Japanese owned to exist here in Orange County. Again, this is massive, and these are really important buildings for both the Japanese community and the community here at Orange County. So what exactly is historic preservation, and what am I here to talk about today? These buildings were very important for the Japanese American community, and they sit kind of forgotten now to the point where most people in Orange County pass by it and don't even pass an eye, right? So historic preservation is the act of taking these old architectural structures and repurposing them, rebuilding them, reconstructing them, and giving them back new life. So preservation itself is the act of keeping a building as is with no major alterations. That means that using original materials, finding original items, maybe polishing them up, and rebuilding the building so that it was the same as it was before. A good example of preservation would be the San Juan Capistrano mission, which again did not have a lot of major alterations to it, and anything that was changed was tried to use the original material. Now, restoration is taking a particular time period or year in which that building existed, and then taking it and changing it back into that same exact state. So any original objects that were left do not get changed, and anything that was maybe destroyed is going to remain destroyed. Restoring it simply means bringing it back to that particular time period. If you think of the East Coast, there's a lot of different historic museums regarding possibly the Pilgrim era and even the Salem witch trials, where they kind of bring back that same era and that same time period to help provide education and a place to explore history. Reconstruction is reconstructing a building, replicating its design, again, in materials, but also giving it kind of a new image. So through reconstruction, we would see that buildings are going to be built up. Anything that is lost would be reconstructed, rebuilt, in comparison to restoration or preservation, or kind of anything that has been destroyed is not going to be seen again. And rehabilitation, my personal favorite, is where you take a building and reinstall it and give it a new life. Down here on the right, we have the old Fiesta Cinema in Santa Ana, which is now known as the Frida Cinema. Now, Frida Cinema took the building, they restored it, they rehabilitated it, and they turned it into a more art house cinema kind of area where tickets are, I believe, only $10 in the hopes of kind of reinstating film back into Santa Ana culture. So again, it was rehabilitated, which means that it now has a different purpose than what it did before, but it's still the same building, it still has a good structural preservation to it, and it was still effectively saved. So why do I want to talk about this rotting building here today? And why should it matter to you, whether you're part of the Japanese American community or not? Preservation is really important for minority culture in particular, because minorities might not have the same records that other immigrants do have. When it comes to continuity, a lot of marginalized groups are unable to save their landmarks again due to certain acts we've seen persecuted against them. Executive Order 9066 kind of helped establish that because, again, a lot of Japanese immigrants returned to have no home, no area for them to live in, and faced even more persecution in the face of society. And the pre-alien land laws restricted immigrants from even purchasing land to begin with. So how can we stand by when this almost perfectly preserved building is still standing here today? Again, there's 3 out of 5 buildings currently standing, and that's really important because we have the chance to take action and actually do something about this before another fire strikes or something else. For Ancestry, I know a lot of people are currently really interested in, let's say, like Ancestry.com, genealogical records, kind of finding out more about the history and where they came from. And that's jolly and fun and all, but if you don't have a record of your family coming here legally, whether that be through one of the islands around America way back in the 1900s, or if you came here on a ship as a refugee and you don't have those records, Ancestry.com can't really help you with connecting to your roots. Again, these are very white-centered ideas that other communities and groups should be a part of. With historic buildings like this, and in particular historic sites, we're providing a physical place for people to ponder and reconnect back to their roots instead of looking through records that, again, they may not simply have. And historic sites help provide a specific place for this to occur and for people to speak on their culture and reconnect with the community that they used to have. And finally, preservation is important for community. Now, again, when it comes to preserving something like this, I'm not saying we should all take a shovel and start digging and maybe make some changes to it, but we can help with volunteer efforts, whether that be maybe picketing or helping to rebuild it once reconstruction actually does start, whenever that may be. We can go ahead and kind of see that this will bring community together. Again, even having a physical place that would be restored would help bridge communities such as the Japanese American community and just the overall community here in Orange County. Speaking of community, I would like to bring up a very important person for this presentation. Mary Adams Urashima was the original grassroots activist who helped kind of start the grassroots project of preserving this area. She helped lead movements, helped hold talks with the Huntington Beach City Council and Republic Services in terms of kind of maybe bringing it back and reconstructing this area, and she passed away in 2022. Which is why there has been no effort made to protect this place since 2022. She was the main leader of the movement. She was the one who kind of held talks regarding preserving it in the name of both Huntington Beach and the name of both America as a whole, because it was recognized by the U.S. Preservation Council as a landmark that should be preserved. And since she has passed, there has been no more effort, no mainstream effort seen in regards to this building. Again, that is a major part of our community. She helped lead these movements, helped spark change, and helped show the importance of what it means to preserve a landmark and why we should preserve it. Now, let's put some theory into practice. I saw a couple of you guys on your phones, so you can go ahead and pull them out now, since you already have them, and take a look at these QR codes. Now, these QR codes, each of which are going to send an email to both the Huntington Beach City Council and the Republic Services marketing office. Now, I've tried to reach them personally multiple times, and they have not responded. Maybe because it was just me sending them a bunch of batty emails, but maybe it's because there hasn't been enough movement regarding this area. Again, if it's just one blonde girl standing outside of this fence saying, hey, let's save this, who's gonna care? But if the community comes together, if we're able to recognize this is important, why it's important, and what we can now do about it, we can finally spark back life into this movement that was unfortunately kind of dissipated with the leaders passing in 2022. So again, although we can't literally pick up a shovel and start digging and rebuilding, I mean, I know nothing about construction, we can still speak on this. And I feel like people forget the importance of speaking out about something. You're bringing awareness to it. You're raising awareness. You're raising attention. And a lot of people overlook that, but that is important. Because, let's be honest, how many of you guys heard about this place before I spoke about it? How many of you guys knew about the importance of this landmark? People pass it by all the time and just say, oh, what a mess. Ew, can't wait for them to get over that, right? Build a nice apartment that I could never afford. But let's not do that. Let's look at the importance of the building. Let's look at why and how we can culturally preserve it and why this is going to be important. For me, I personally believe that this area would benefit from both reconstruction and rehabilitation. There were efforts to try and make it into a Japanese American Heritage Museum. Again, they have been since stalled, but even rebuilding it, even reestablishing it as a church would be massive for both the Japanese American community and the Orange County community as a whole. Thank you.